Okay, here we go with the first example. So in this example, we want to know what the population and the sample is. So when it says we surveyed 888 registered voters, the people that were surveyed become the sample. And since the sample is taken from the population, that means that the population is all California registered voters. And the keyword there is all. So then the parameter and the statistic are the only two things left in this problem. Now we have two percentages that are given here, 53% and 54%. So in that first sentence it says that the survey found that 53% were opposed. So the result of the sample is the statistic. So that means 53% goes down here, and the 54% is going to go here. Now the only thing we didn't use here is the 3.5%, and that's the margin of error. Now later on we'll know what that is, but that's just superfluous information for this problem. Okay, that brings us to example 2. Now we want to determine if we've been given a statistic or a parameter. So we're looking here for keywords that are the differences, and the first thing I notice is we have the word sampled, we have sample, and we have a survey. And in the other examples, let's see that in red, it looks like we have other words. So we have the actual, we have there are, something was, the median was, and 10.1% were. So these are all words that indicate some sort of fact. So all the red ones are going to be parameters. And all the purple ones are going to be statistics. So that is how we do example 2. Okay, here we are for example 3. And in this example, we want to be really careful about the words that are used. We want to make sure we don't make assumptions that aren't there. So it says that a political scientist wants to know how college students, let's pay attention to that statement right there, how college students feel about the Social Security system. So in part A it says what's the population, which when we're asking that we're saying what group do we want information about. The population is all college students. And for part B it says what is the sample. So we're given some different numbers here. We have the 250, we have 104 that are returned. So the sample is the 104 that we have results for. And the remaining of the 250 that were sent out, we don't have results for, so we can't include them in our sample. So what group do we actually contain information about is the 104 from her college. So we have 104 college students from one college. Okay, now what are some reasons this sample is not representative? Well, there's a few things that we have issues with here. Number one is that we want all college students. Now that doesn't mean that we want to survey all college students in the country, that would realistically not be possible. But what we do want is a sample that represents all college students. And this sample only really represents a portion of college students from one college. So we really wouldn't do a good job of representing the population of all college students. If our population changed and our statement changed up here to we want to know how college students feel at a particular college about Social Security system, then we would be fine. So that's the main issue here. Another issue that we'll get to later is something that we're going to call voluntary response bias. And that's an issue that we haven't really discussed it in these notes, but essentially, if we're only getting results from people who voluntarily return information, we're probably only getting a sample that feels a very strong way. And what we really want to do if we're having a good sample is have results from people that have various levels of feelings towards a subject. Now I think this ties in really nicely to the next example, which says what do we want in a good sample? And essentially we want the sample to represent the population. So there's a lot of different ways that we can think about, does our sample represent the population? But that's the main idea here. Now this section here, this is really important. These are the sampling methods, and you will need to know these. And you will be doing an activity in the lab for Chapter 1 that directly ties into these. So there's some great examples here that I don't need to fill out, but I wanted to show these. And then here's this voluntary response sampling, and that's kind of what I was alluding to in example 3. So there's some bias that happens there. So let's take a look at example 5 now. It says a survey is going to be taken, and we have some different methods of picking 100 students out of the 2,000 that are registered at the school. So this says using an official school roster of the 2,000 students, pick every 20th name. So when we have something that says every nth, that means that we have some sort of system, so that's systematic. And for part B, we're going to separate by class. So we have some different categories. And then we're going to pick 25 from each. So when we're picking the same number from each of the categories, then that's going to be stratified. Okay, now part C says using a random number table. This is just simple random sampling. And part D says to separate the students by homeroom and then pick a random sample of 4 homerooms. And then all students, so when all of the students, instead of just a sample from each homeroom, but all the students in that homeroom, that's going to be an example of a cluster. Okay, so for example 6, we need to know the difference between an observational study and an experiment. So when we're looking at these studies, we want to look for the keywords, and it looks like a group is evaluated. So when something is just evaluated, and we're not actually changing, we're not telling them to eat something or do something different, and we're not splitting them into groups, then that's a good indication indication that this is an observation. And the second study, we divided them into two groups. And the first group was asked to do something, and the second group was not asked to not do something. So that means that the first study was an observational study, while the second was an experiment. Okay, here in example 7, we're dividing plants into two groups. So we have shade plants and we have sun plants. And then within each group, we're going to assign them to one of 3 types. So classical, rock, and hip-hop music. We're going to play that to each plant for 30 minutes a day. So we are doing an experiment because we are doing something to the plants. So we have to figure out which one of these types. Now the key word here is in block design, we have more than 2 treatments. And remember down here it said we have 3 treatment types. So this is going to be a block. Alrighty, down here in example 8, we have a multiple choice. And in this study here, this experiment actually, what we're doing here is we are looking at the effects of a toothpaste. And it says that 60 subjects had their whiteness of their teeth measured, and then they were told to use the toothpaste. But we didn't ever have a group that did not use the toothpaste. So option A is our answer here. I also just want to note that option B is not correct because this cannot be an observational study since we are asking the subjects to do something. We are having them use this toothpaste, so it is definitely not an observation. And that does it for the problems on the Chapter 1 lecture notes.